right, looks like we have a good group of people on. We'll get started. Welcome everyone to the Future Focus Disruption and Rebuilding of Human Capital discussion. This is brought to you by our International Business Forum, which is sponsored by Baker McKenzie. We're excited to have all of our wonderful panelists here today. And to get us started, I will hand things over to Scott D'Angelo, who's the chair of our International Business Forum. Over to you, Scott.
Great, thanks so much, Megan. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual International Business Forum event, Future Focus, Disruption and Rebuilding of Human Capital. As Megan mentioned, I'm Scott D'Angelo, chair of the International Business Forum at the Executives Club, and I'm very excited to welcome you to today's conversation. As we're all aware, workforce disruption has been a #1 issue for most of businesses over the past year. As we can finally see some glimmers of a post-COVID era with the vaccine rollout in motion, now is the time to prepare for the future ahead. Today, we convene thought leaders who will provide some other advice and best practices for managing a remote and hybrid workforce, building new business and nurturing client relationships, and the future of business travel habits. Before we get started, I'll remind you to put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We also invite you to be active in the chat to share your thoughts with fellow attendees during the conversation. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today and for this important discussion. And thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your busy days to share your insights with us. And without further ado, why don't we get started? And to start, let's kick off with a quick round of introductions. Panelists, please tell us who you are, what you do, and for fun, your best work from home tip, given our topic today. And I'll start with Chris, please.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and thank you for having me on the panel today. I'm really excited about our discussion. My name is Chris Carey, and I'm Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Constellation Brands Beer Division. Yes, I get to use Beer Division in my title. I get a lot of grief from my colleagues on that. I'm responsible for leading the HR teams that support our beer business, which includes all of our commercial as well as our production operations in the US and Mexico. In terms of a work from home tip, it's going to be really simple, but it's been such a critical part for me is just scheduling a lunch break. It is so easy to start in the morning and continue to work, and there's always work to be done, and sometimes you forget to have lunch or just to walk away from the screen. So I try to schedule a lunch break and actually leave the screen, for half an hour, 45 minutes, get some lunch, when the weather was nice, walk around the block, whatever the case may be. But, taking that break really does help to reset your perspective for the rest of the afternoon.
Great. Well, thanks, Chris. And that's a good tip as opposed to my practice, which was not to take a lunch break, but basically just to eat trail mix all day while I was sitting at my computer. So that didn't turn out well. But okay, how about Michael?
Hi, Scott. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking a lunch break with us today. Maybe it's a trail mix break. We're not here to judge. My name is Mike. I am a partner at Kpmg's Human Capital Advisory practice. So I've been spending a lot of time with organizations over the last 20 years, helping them transform the way that work gets done. And in the last 12 months, have turned that up to 11 in terms of both intensity and kind of really frequency of these kinds of conversations. So excited to be here today. This might be too much information. Let's find out together. I stopped wearing socks. And what I'm trying to do, the reason for that is I'm trying to remind myself that I'm very much not trying to replicate being in person in like a traditional business environment, but just doing it in my house. Like I'm trying to embrace the fact that I'm at home. So my rug purchase has gone up, but have done my best to be as barefoot as possible to kind of, and I can't believe I'm going to say it, keep me grounded a little bit on just sort of where I'm at. So
that's no pun intended.
No pun intended, or pun very intended. Let's be honest.
Well, thanks, Michael. Duane.
Thanks, Scott. That was a lot of fun, Michael. Hi, everyone. Great to be here with all of you, my fellow panelists. My name is Duane Edwards. I am a portfolio director from IDEO, which means I help clients leverage design to create new products, systems change, or transform as an organization. For a work from home tip, for me, I'm kind of a bit more on the basic side like Chris, where I like getting out in the morning and evening and going for a walk. And so I simulate a commute in my brain to just give myself transition time, moving, whether it be from home to work or from work to home, so I could be fully present with my family or colleagues.
Very good. That's great. Thanks, Duane and Alexandra.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. My name is Alexandra Levitt, and I am a human capital futurist. And what that basically means is that I look at trends percolating up through the business world and the workforce and try to determine what has the greatest potential for disruption. And then I make an educated guess to help organizations prepare for what will be the eventual future. I'm also the author of the book Humanity Works, Merging Technologies and People for the Workforce of the Future. And my favorite work from home tip is to know when to strategically use the "do not interrupt under any circumstances" sign on my door for the kids.
And then my follow-up question to that is, do they actually respect that? Because I think I tried that as well, and it had little to no effect on interruptions. So.
The first time they didn't adhere to it when it was up, the reaction that they got from me afterward, I think was punishment enough. So then they, after that, they did not bother me again when I had to sign up.
Got it. Very good. Well, thanks for those introductions and for those tips. And so let's shift gears and get started with some of our questions. And I wanted to begin today by going over some of the broad themes we want to cover in this hour. And as mentioned sort of at the top of our discussion, the genesis of this event was really to answer the question of what will the future of our workforce look like for international business relationships and global companies. So I'll start by going down the line to each of the panelists and asking you to begin our conversation with a discussion around leadership as kind of a good and starting foundational point. Specifically, organizations, no matter the size, that will make it through this last year of unprecedented disruption and uncertainty really need to be equipped with great leaders, not only at the top of the company, but throughout. And in each of your experiences, so my question really is that in each of your experiences, how have leaders in your orbit stepped up to the plate, even when they themselves might not know the answers? Why don't I start with Michael on this question, please?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I think the thing that I've seen leaders that we've worked with, both sort of inside of KPMG, but also on the client side, is the willingness to admit that they don't have an answer, and the willingness to sort of embrace, wow, hey guys, this is really weird, right? And we're surfacing now all sorts of things that before we used to keep buried under the calm demeanor of this is just the way we work. The more organizations are willing to sort of open up the Pandora's box, and the last 11 and a half months have been very much that sort of Pandora's box opening moment. And the more leaders are willing to embrace the fact that we're in an uncharted, unknown territory and we're working on this together, and I value your input and I want you to think about others and create that sense of empathy, there's just directly correlated to people being in a better spot. I think we've been talking about leading with empathy in the human capital practice forever. And the notion of humanizing executives and humanizing leaders. And when we talk to organizations that are feeling good about where they're at, the common theme that comes out is empathy, and the common theme that comes out is a willingness to kind of embrace this and extend trust and talk about what's challenging to people, and basically like creating an entire new rubric for how they're managing people, and that's come about in the last 11 months, really, and it's probably here to stay. I don't see us going backwards on that front. So willingness to embrace it and lead with empathy has really been a key distinction that I've seen.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And it seems like there's been a lot of conversations around that topic. And I think it's particularly an interesting conversation to have with men and women who lead large organizations, because I think that there's probably a desire and an expectation on their part to have all the answers and want to be able to feel like they have all the answers, and to be able to sort of see the other side of that and understand. You create empathy and transparency when you say, I don't know where this is going, but what I do know is here's how we're going to move. So that seems to be a very common theme among leadership over the last year. Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Duane, I could ask for your feedback on this. Would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, +1 to what Michael said. So love that answer. And we've seen the same thing in the IDEO and many of our clients as well. And maybe what I'll build on top of that is kind of 2 points. One, I've seen leaders really recognize the fact that it's a collaborative exercise to figure out how we kind of move through this together, and meeting employees where they are and recognizing that everyone is having different experiences, right? So you have some people who have been maybe excited by not having a commute anymore and they have more time, while others are struggling with childcare, not really sure how to navigate it. They need Alex's sign on their door all the time. And so you have that. And then you also have this perspective that I've seen, which I've really appreciated from many leaders, of using this opportunity to recognize, you know what, some of our ways of working, some of our ways of collaborating, and some of our maybe even use of office space have been based on assumptions that aren't holding, right? And recognizing that this is the time to really acknowledge the fact that what are those assumptions, and maybe let's reframe the question around how should we work in a more inclusive way that can really help each other maximize the value of diverse teams and diverse experiences, while also keeping each other safe. So I'm seeing leaders show up really engaging collaboratively with employees, and also asking better questions to help push us in a better place moving forward.
And have you found that, you know, to that point, have you found that there's been active engagement from the employees in terms of giving feedback and appreciating the opportunity? Because I know sometimes, you know, those situations, the doors, you know, there's the proverbial door is open, but people don't always walk through the door and give that feedback. Have you found that this situation has, you know, increased the, you know, employees or, you know, likelihood to really be authentic about what they really need and provide that feedback?
Yeah, I think in my experience with the folks that I've chatted to in the surveys I've seen, we've definitely haven't been on the wanting side. Of course, you always want to hear from everyone. And of course, there's always some employees that won't engage. But I think we've seen large numbers of folks really coming in, and diverse perspectives of what those needs are with regards to parents and what those needs are, individuals. We've also seen a lot of supervisors, managers engaging in more in-depth conversations with employees, whereas it was more so work focused. Now we're kind of broadening the scope a bit and viewing life a bit more holistically. So seeing a bunch of shifts there and trying to engage in different ways to kind of pull that out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Duane. And Chris, if I could ask for your feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, you know, Mike and Duane hit all the key points on that. You know, from my perspective, I can talk a little bit about sort of the practical things that we've done. Absolutely transparency, you know, admitting to our workforce that the leaders don't have all the answers, and then asking them for their recommendations and their thoughts. And so what we did was a couple things. Number one, you know, we make beer. We don't know much about viruses, and there's only so much our EHS folks can do. And so one of the first things we did was to hire a full-time chief medical officer. And so we had somebody in the organization who we could always turn to at, you know, a moment's notice to get his professional, you know, scientific opinion as we were dealing through not only just our workforce that was in the office, but obviously we had essential workers in the plants working every day. And so for them, life hasn't changed much. They still got to go in there, and we've got to do everything we can to make sure that we are protecting their safety and their health. The other piece of it is that we also went out and put out sentiment surveys for our folks. And so again, you know, confidential, you know, questions, asking them about what are the challenges, what are the stressors in their lives. And, you know, from those surveys, which, you know, we got 80+% participation, which is really high for surveys, was, you know, we found out that it wasn't just the working parents, it was the single individual in the 500 square foot apartment who is now completely isolated, right? Who used to come into work, have friends, be able to, you know, have conversations. And how do we support those folks through, you know, this changing landscape? And so again, just being really forthright with our organization and our people, and just continuing to over communicate, like every day, every other week, trying to let them know where we are, where we're going, where we have answers and where we don't have answers, and what we're trying to do to find those answers. And I think that's really contributed to at least our workforce feeling like our leaders have handled the situation as best as they could.
That's great. And I mean, you know, one interesting point, Chris, you know, you pointed out about your company and what, you know, you're managing is just the diversity of the workforce in terms of, you've got folks that are in that are in production and manufacturing, and then you've got office personnel. And so did you find that the leaders, you know, sort of had to tailor their message a little bit differently to those different constituencies, or did sort of were there overarching themes that kind of resonated with everyone?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Scott. We had to be very mindful of our communications and be very, inclusive in our communications. Again, obviously, we've got folks who are going into the facilities who don't have the ability to work from home, and it's a whole sort of different circumstances. So as we were communicating out, we wanted to make sure that we were very targeted in terms of what we were doing specific for our production workers, what types of benefits, what types of information, how we were structuring things so that they understood that their health and well-being was obviously as important as the folks working in the office.
Great. Well, thanks, Chris. And Alexandra.
Well, the other panelists obviously underscored this brilliantly. The importance of transformational leadership, or understanding where people are coming from, seeking out different perspectives. And of course, that involves things like empathy. It involves things like caring for the holistic employee from both a personal and professional perspective. And the one thing that I feel like pretty much everybody covered everything else already. But I would say that the emphasis on mental health is going to become extraordinarily important for leaders. And this is an area where leaders didn't really get involved in employee mental health in the past, but it's going to become such a huge issue and problem over the next few years, not even during the immediate crisis necessarily, as we're all just trying to survive, but in the aftermath. And there's actually been some studies going on right now that predict that potentially we could be dealing with mental health fallout that's 5 to 10 years past this COVID-19 crisis. And so I think leadership right now is doing a great job at trying to meet employees where they are from a mental health perspective, and we need to keep up the great work.
Yeah, and Alex, that's a great point. And I've seen some articles recently that really, to your point, describe the potential mental health crisis almost like an aftershock, that it's not going to necessarily happen immediately, but it's going to be, these rolling issues that probably will come on the back end of this crisis. So, so I think the fact that, leadership has really taken up the mantle and focused on that is hopefully a proactive way to mitigate some of the effects of that. So, and I'll stay with you, Alex, since you went last. I'll start with you. And again, given that you're the futurist on this panel, my question is going to focus on COVID as the great accelerator. So many of the issues we've been discussing already in our session today have been percolating at the surface of our workforces, even before the pandemic occurred. So what would be great if you could talk to us a little bit about which trends you saw coming down the line and which trends surprised you.
Okay, well, this is super fun, and I'll try to cover as much as I can in a limited period of time. First of all, the acceleration of what we saw coming, what was more or less expected. The rise of the gig economy, the rise of the contract workforce, internal talent marketplaces, and what I call talent assembly, which refers to constructing teams from a variety of different types of workers with different employment arrangements in hot areas of the business to solve specific business problems. This was something we saw before, but it has been accelerated. The understanding of how human capital quantitatively drives business value. So the use of big data, analytics, executive dashboards to determine what is and isn't working in different areas of human capital, like talent acquisition, learning, scheduling, performance, the use of AI to combat unconscious bias. This was already starting. The focus on data quality, data integration, and data governance. It's obviously more important now, but it started a few years back. The shift in the flow of work due to new players in the market like Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. Suddenly, it's not just about human capital management software, but it's about doing work on online collaboration platforms that we are already using to do other things in our lives. And then finally, I would say the arrival of curated learning by in-house subject matter experts, people going after continuous learning opportunities via certifications, via micro-credentials, the ability to learn in kind of any kind of circumstances and being supported by that with your employer and people who work within your organization. Now the fun part, what has surprised me. So a couple things. It has surprised me that so many organizations have slapped online in-person processes and called that digital transformation, right? I think that was fine for the first 6 months of this crisis, but it's time to move on. We need to understand that one size does not fit all. We have to permanently adapt certain processes to be anti-fragile, to be prepared for the next crisis, and to be an effective mix of what we call high tech and high touch. So knowing when something should be governed by a human versus when it can be done by automation or by machine learning. It has surprised me that more leaders, given what's going on today, haven't engaged in strategic foresight or aren't doing so now to be at least moderately prepared for what's certain to be a future disruption. We've got COVID-19 now, but there may be another pandemic. There may be an adverse climate event that disrupts business continuity. We have to be looking at what has happened today and figuring out how we can do it a bit better next time. It has surprised me that no one is talking about what we will do when we are permanently dependent on technology and that technology breaks. What happens when it gets seriously hacked? What happens when we have bandwidth and access challenges? What happens when there are too many systems and usability and adoption start to falter among our people? And what data and privacy concerns will arise with increased employee monitoring? So these are all things that I think could be a little bit higher up on the radar for leaders that we really don't hear much about. And then, Scott, I'm not sure if you wanted me to talk about what we can expect next, or if you wanted me to give a pause there.
Maybe just a quick pause and one question. So you had mentioned this idea of high tech versus high touch. And what sort of, I mean, are you seeing any trends in that area in terms, or do you foresee any trends, or do you feel like there's any trends in that area in terms of where, how leaders or how organizations are bucketing different tasks into each of those areas?
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. The evolution of the employee experience has definitely reflected the high tech, high touch. We see continuous response platforms where people can talk back and forth, hyper personalization of the employee experience, like what you are delivered is based on your unique role and what you are bringing to the table and what you're trying to learn. The learning that is involved, just from an individual perspective, the recommendations that you are delivered by your system, but then it is followed up by, let's say, a mentorship meeting or sponsorship or a job shadow opportunity with an actual person in your organization. So I think, definitively speaking, most organizations are doing this very, very well. And it's just a matter of when we're looking at job redesign, which is something that's going to happen a lot over the next few years. We really have to take a step back and say, just because we can automate something doesn't necessarily mean we should. So we have to look at what are machines good at and what are human beings good at, and figure out how we can deconstruct jobs into the skills that we need humans to do, and how can we train humans effectively in those skills. And I think that in a nutshell, those are the challenges that I would say leaders are going to be facing in the next couple of years.
Great. And would there be any other trends that you haven't already mentioned, like 5-10 years down the road, that you think leaders need to be cognizant of? I mean, I know you've gone through quite a list already, but just as a follow-up, anything else, any other trends that you see coming down the road?
Sure. Well, first of all, I know we have a lot of financial services folks on the call today, so I would have to give a shout out to blockchain and the fact that it's not just for financial services. In human capital, we see a lot of applications, particularly for intellectual property and compensation systems. So how to keep those as up to speed as possible using this ledger technology. So that's one. I would say the use of augmented and virtual reality to simulate in-person interaction for global teams that can't get together in person is something that we're going to see much more of. The need for proactive AI ethics and regulation of augmented human workers. And this will be the thing that I'll leave you with, is that we tend to think that humans and machines are going to evolve on separate but parallel paths, when in fact, what we're going to see is human beings being supplemented with technology in our bodies that will help us do our jobs better and help us do our jobs differently. So we actually have to start looking at that as an asset, not just necessarily a piece of automation or a robot versus just homegrown human. We have to be looking at the collaboration and the combination of the two.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So yeah, no, thanks, Alex. That was great. Okay, why don't I turn now to shift gears a little bit now and kind of talk a little bit about, and one of the things, Alex, you had touched on was just human interaction and relationships and how that's been impacted and how those relationships might look in the future. And I think with that as a jumping off point, I'd like to shift over to Duane. IDEO is known for its creativity and ability to devise out of the box solutions to all sorts of complex problems. And you yourself have a fascinating background as a former intelligence officer with the Marine Corps and as a product manager at Volvo. So very diverse, very interesting background. And now as a portfolio director at IDEO, what were the most common issues clients were coming to you with over the last year, and how did you keep a fresh perspective this past year?
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. I appreciate the little bio plug there. So thank you for that. It's always nice kind of hearing a little sentiment there. Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? So for us at IDEO, immersion with our customers or communities we're designing with or for is really important for our process, right? And so as it pertains to our clients and challenges that they're seeing, one of the big hot topics have been coming up. I mean, no surprise here. I think we're at a point where we're seeing macro trends pointing to, hey, this return to normalcy or new normal is around the corner. Or hopefully around the corner, right? Still have a little ways to go, but what could that mean for our workforce in terms of our office space? How should we then should we keep thinking about kind of reverting back to what it was? Likely not. Well, if not, then what should it be? And so we have I think we're fortunate enough to have architects, engineers, experienced designers, and a whole group of folks who have been spending a bit of time thinking about this. We're doing this right now for a Fortune 20 company globally. And so we're excited about some of the experiments that we're running to think about what this could look like. I think the other thing that we're excited about is the fact that given this context, we're in a good place, as Alex pointed out, all these unknowns for the future. For us, we're really helping our clients think about experiments and testing as opposed to moving with a preconceived notion. What experiment can be run now to figure out what collaboration could look like? How can we learn from that? How can we measure and test and then move forward? And so those are the things that we're excited to really help our clients move forward amidst a time where it really feels like experimenting and testing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Duane, because as you also pointed out, we're not out of the woods yet, and it really kind of feels like there's going to be a period of time where we're almost in a transition phase where it's not, the paradigm isn't going to shift all the way in one direction or the other, but we're kind of going to be in this phase of kind of getting our footing back and trying to figure out where the tide is going to take us a little bit. So I think that the advice about testing out different concepts and theories really makes a lot of sense, and frankly would help leaders make informed decisions about where things are going to go in the future. And you had mentioned, I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, just in the context of the discussion about leadership and what leaders are doing, but any other thoughts or tips on how you've engaged with your internal team and in terms of keeping tabs on everyone's resilience and mental health during this time?
Yeah, great question, Scott. So I'm pretty old school in my kind of leadership model, and the first thing that I promote and do is lead by example. Right, that's like the foundation of, I think, of leadership for me at least. And so, as it pertains to me sharing my own process and my own self-care and self-management, that's something I'm forward sharing with teams and individuals to kind of give space to that conversation. So that's one. Two, really engaging in deeper conversations, right, with people on my team and trying to broaden the conversation beyond, hey, this deliverable or this content at work, and asking about their weekends, asking about their time away from work, really broadening that conversation. And thirdly, it's not always what people do and say, it's sometimes what they don't say and don't do, right? So it's paying attention to those patterns and having an established relationship enough to be able to understand where something out of the norm occurs, and then being able to have that conversation. Even if it's benign, what I found at least is that the recipient appreciates the concern, right? And so that's been a bunch of things that I've done with my team, and seemingly it's going well. I haven't heard anything negative back thus far, so we'll keep posted on that one.
That's great, and I think you made great points there, just about that, sort of that even though again you're operating in a virtual world, that touch and the reach out, and also kind of understanding that person, where that person's what that person's situation might be. I mean, it was almost back to Chris's point about it's understanding whether you're dealing with someone on your team who's living by themselves in a small apartment, in downtown Chicago versus someone who might have a family with kids running around and not obeying do not disturb signs and things like that. So I think being sensitive and almost recognizing those things in some ways, it almost creates more humanization than we had even in the past. So I think that's a great point. That's a great point. Thanks. Thank you, Duane. Okay, well, as we shift gears to one other question, I just wanted to take a second and also remind our audience that we do have the Q&A chat function at the bottom of your screen. So if you have some questions that you'd like to tee up for our panel here, we'll be breaking for audience Q&A here in a few minutes. I would love to have your questions for our panelists as well. So please don't hesitate to use that function or provide us with your feedback in terms of questions. And now I'd like to shift gears then over to back to Michael. So Michael is a principal in the Human Capital Advisory practice at Kpmg. My question for you is actually quite straightforward. I think many of the smaller firms in the audience might take their cues from what major consulting shops are doing. So what will the plan be for your army of workweek warriors, the consultants who are used to being on the road 4 days a week to clients? What will that look like for them, going forward, and what do you expect their attitude to be in terms of your clients' expectations to be in terms of that service?
It's I will tell you, this is probably the top question that we've been struggling with as an organization. So, bearing in mind that one of my biggest clients is actually my own firm, and trying to sort through this. So, as recently as 5 days ago, with our leadership, having this discussion about how do I balance clients who, some of which are going to want to go back to, I expect you to be here Monday to Thursday. Welcome back to the United 1K line. It's happening, right? So that's like one end of the spectrum. There's another end of the spectrum that says, look, you know what? I used to actually spend like a decent amount of money on bringing you here. And I just found out in the last 11 months that I don't always need you here. So we have to figure something out about the right times to kind of interact. And what we're focused on is creating for our partners and for our clients and a view on what is like the most purposeful interaction you can have with us. Like, when does it make sense for me to be physically proximate to you? We're going to engage and interact in 3 dimensions, not 2. And what should your expectation be from that? And what should my expectation be from that? And let's kind of walk into this conversation together saying, look, when I'm here to do a physical attestation audit, we should have an expectation about what it's going to mean for me to be in my space with you. Or if I'm here to do a project kickoff or a meeting with your executive teams, let's talk about when that's best done, again, in 3 dimensions versus 2. And otherwise, let's find opportunities for us to create experiences that are a little bit more fluid, introduce the concept of choice and agency, and meet you where you're at. I think one of our realizations is that we are always prepared to go Monday to Friday, 9 to 8 to 7 to whatever, to get to a client's need. But there's also a conscious recognition that a lot of our clients are telling us they're not going to be there all the time. So, there's that variable as well. As a lot of organizations, when we do our research, the majority of organizations are telling us that they are expecting to work from home 2 to 3 days a week. That's how they're sort of loosely calibrating around the notion of a hybrid way of working going forward, when their role allows them to. You can't bottle beer at home, right, Chris? But you can kind of, do the cost accounting for it from home. And I think we want to meet our folks where they're at. I want to meet our clients where I'm at. I want to create a model for our consultants that's meaningful for them, so they're getting the best interaction with our clients and with each other, but they don't necessarily have to sleep in a hotel bed every night if they don't have to. And that's I mentioned Pandora's box. Like, that's the thing that's coming out right now is how much should I expect to be on the road, or how much should I expect to be in an office going forward? The bottom line is we are here for our clients, and as our clients' comfort levels demand, that's where we're at. It's our job to sort of help our clients navigate it when they find themselves in the gray area between the 2 extremes. So that's a really long way, Scott, as consultants will do, of saying, I don't know yet. Yeah, but I can tell you, like, when we're focused on it, we're focused on thinking about the totality, and our focus is on purposeful interaction.
Got it. Got it. No, that's great, Michael. And again, as a lawyer, I can say it's almost a lawyer-like answer, right? I mean, we can never answer questions in a short manner either. So you nailed it. No, but again, there's a lot of meat there for KPMG, because to your point, and I almost sort of harken back a little bit to Duane's comment, which is it almost feels like there's going to be a period of time where there's going to have to be some toing and froing and also conversations with clients, because like any client service organization, it's probably going to have to be a bit of a bespoke, process to sort of ask, what does client A want versus what does client B want, and fit that into a box that also makes all of your employees, comfortable and motivated to do what they need to do in order to service your client.
You're totally right. And I think the funny thing is the more we thought about it, the more we're like, wait a minute, we were sort of doing that already. It's just our default setting was maybe a little bit more in person, and we were biased more to face-to-face three-dimensional interaction, because that's what everyone's bias was. But if I change the overall kind of zeitgeist around the importance of that, suddenly all sorts of things like come crashing down, and we can have a different conversation on a different level. But our folks are used to working in a hybrid way. We're going to continue to do so. I would suggest that the majority of organizations, like if you've given your folks a laptop, you're used to them working in a hybrid way too. So getting comfortable on that and really coming out with like, what is it I want out of the interaction, I think is going to be meaningful for everyone.
Scott, I just have one quick comment to add. I love what Mike and Duane have said around the use of office space, because the reimagining of in-person office space and how to have mixed-use buildings that you don't leave large city infrastructures crumbling because organizations have decided they don't need their consultants in there 4 days a week. I'm fascinated by that. And I'm also fascinated by some of the political notions that will arise around the new world of work, such as, is it desirable, is it prestigious to get invited to an in-person meeting when you can only have 5 people in the room? I'm very interested from a sociological perspective as to how these things are going to unfold in the next months and years.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The point about the meetings is an interesting point. Yeah, I can definitely see that being a message or a direct or an indirect message that may have to be managed with your teams as you think about those sorts of meetings and other get-togethers. So,
Scott, to add on to that, just if I could, that actually that's why it's so difficult for corporations and organizations to sort of very easily come up with these types of policies as we think about what the work life is going to look forward, because it's not as simple as, great, everybody gets 3 days in the office or 2 days in the office and you kind of go about your way, right? There's this whole dynamic around, understanding what that means for the employee in terms of development. You talk about face time, you talk about office space. There's already in our organization, like if I'm only in 2 weeks, 2 days a week, do I not get an office space? Do I have to hotel? Do I have to move like all of these little things play into it, right? And then when you talk about the broader perspective, as Alex sort of, alluded to, it's like, okay, well, what about the development piece of it? How do you move employees up when in-person meetings, relationship development, mentors, sponsors within the organization? Those are things that are very, very important, right? As you move your career, is that going to be difficult if I'm working from home 3 days a week now? Is that a career choice that I want to make or need to make? The second piece of it, I think that's really interesting from a sort of a human resources perspective is managers, right? Managers, some may be more equipped and can easily deal with managing a workforce that's dispersed, whereas others will not be. And so there's that whole training piece of really getting managers accustomed to how do you have development conversations via WebEx versus in person? How do you manage it? How are we assessing whether we are fairly assessing all the employees based on their work product versus whether they're in the office 3 or 4 days a week? So those are all things that HR teams have been tasked with to really think through and try to put together and sort of balance the pros and the cons. And then you add in the business needs, because again, we can't make beer. At least the beer I make at home, I can't sell under my brands. That would not be acceptable. So how do you balance all of those different pieces of it as we try to define job specs and who can and can't really work at home and what makes sense? So I think there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done behind the scenes with that.
Absolutely. I mean, as you were describing all those things, Chris, I was trying to imagine like your whiteboard in your home office with all of these like questions, because it really is, when you verbalize that, it really can almost be overwhelming when you think about the different permutations of these decisions and the messages that they send, direct or indirect, and trying to keep employees motivated and feel valued is really a challenge for particularly for people in your position. So really, very impressed with all the thought that's you're putting into it. I'm sure this has been a long a long discussion that is obviously going to continue for quite some time. Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, let's stay with you. And were there any other? You've identified a number of different issues, and particularly as it relates to how managers and others are going to need to communicate with their teams and manage their communications and their relationships with their team members. But were there any other solutions that you're thinking about now that you're planning to implement or thinking about implementing in terms of managing sort of the hybrid workforce as we go forward? I know you talked a little bit at the top of our discussion and just now, but is there anything else that you want to add on that point?
Yeah, no, I think just, from our perspective, right, as we think about returning to some semblance of normalcy and in-person work, right, we always sort of are guided by the principle of safety of our employees, right? We're not out of the pandemic yet. You think about not just the office space, but you think about being in Chicago, people taking the L, taking the Metro. Are they comfortable? What are we looking at from that perspective? And then obviously transparency, right? Again, making sure that people understand that we're working towards a solution and giving them comfort that we will give them plenty of time to sort of adjust, absorb, digest whatever the solution is and make arrangements. Because again, people like certainty. It's very difficult, especially if you have, family obligations, care obligations, et cetera. Just making sure that we have that transparency with our organization. So again, the list of things that we have to consider, we're not where we want to be yet. We're still considering all of that. And so just making sure that our employee base understands that, we're working towards that end.
And apart from what we've kind of already covered, any other lessons learned from the transition to work from home that you think is going to apply kind of in the reverse? I know you've covered quite a bit already, but anything else on that front?
No, not really. Other than, we were happily surprised at how agile and adaptive our workforce was. And I believe they'll be the same as we sort of flip the script and come back the other way. It's, we were joking around, like in February, we were at a large, meeting with 1,000 people, and less than 2 weeks later, everybody sort of scattered, offices were closed, and it was literally like flipping a switch. And it was amazing how well our organization, and I have to actually give kudos to the HR organization, because I think during this pandemic, the HR professionals have been sort of at the front and center of really helping our businesses guide through these different, changes and crises. And so a lot of them have been working, overtime and hard, and really, putting the nose to the grindstone to really come up with solutions and ideas to support the business as well as support employees.
That's great. No, that's great. It's funny you mentioned that about the flexibility, because obviously I wouldn't have fallen into that category, because I think I've gone through like the seven stages of grief, with initially thinking, I don't know how in the world I will ever be able to get my job done at home, to to abject disdain, and then finally to actually this isn't that bad, and now I don't want to go back to my office. So yeah, I think I've done the whole curve on that front. So absolutely.
Scott, one of the things I think is really interesting with respect to moving to a fully virtual, fully remote workforce is the young professionals who have never worked in an in-person environment. And to what Chris is saying, like, how do we make sure those people have the skills and that they're able to build the relationships when they don't have anything to start with? They have no real perspective on the old world of doing business.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I know, in my area, we've had young associates who have started that have only been virtual. So really having experienced the full scope of working at a law firm, or I'm sure it may be the same way for Michael as well, in terms of folks who just haven't experienced that full in the office interaction and environment. So that will definitely be some change for them as well on the other direction. Yeah. Great. All right, well, I think we're going to take a second now and transition over to some Q&A. So we have got some very interesting questions here that we're going to run through. So I'm going to start with first question here, which is an observation about office space. We never needed to all come to an office to sit in cubicles and send each other emails and instant chats. But if we come into a physical office, even without meetings, we could still have meaningful human interactions, even if the work activity is mainly individual. It seems like a guiding principle for rethinking office. It seems like a guiding principle for rethinking office space should be rethinking how to build more human connection, both through physical design and redefining human interaction patterns. Your thoughts? And I think maybe I might turn to Duane, if you don't mind, given some of the areas that you covered in your conversations earlier. What are your thoughts on this question? You don't mind me putting you on the spot?
I don't at all. I appreciate you actually putting me on the spot, so thanks for that. I have a couple thoughts. I think the person that asked that question is spot on. As we think about office space, and there's two frames that I have as I think through this answer. First of which being talent, learning, and growth. Right. With regards to people, I think Alex pointed out junior employees and senior employees. There's a lot of actually learning and growth that happens within offices. Right. So it's not necessarily on a project per se, but it might be close interaction, sitting across from each other, hearing someone and how they're maneuvering a situation, asking a question. So that is one aspect of office space that we absolutely have to think about. And then as we go into actual projectized work, collaboration, there are likely some opportunities for us to rethink the models that existed around collaboration for us to figure out how this new model can be, one, maximize value for, of course, like the business, but also for the individual employee, so that they can feel like they're bringing their whole self to this work, right? So there are a lot of people within projects that we know of. We got BIPOC employees that might feel that they're not able to bring their full selves to their work. And so this is an opportunity for us to think about being more inclusive with our projects to ensure that people have an opportunity to bring their whole selves to work. And then also, we process differently. Some might be external processors, some might be internal processors. Maybe we have to rethink some of our activities around projects to ensure that we can really give everyone an opportunity to share and be comfortable and really kind of bring their full selves to work. So as we think about rethinking space while still balancing learning and growth, while still reconciling the need to be safe because we're not out the woods yet, there's a bunch of things that we have to think about while we design, experiment, test, and move forward with different options. So I'm excited about that opportunity, and I appreciate that question being asked.
That's great, Duane. Thank you. A lot to consider there. Any other thoughts from the panel on this question? Okay.
The only thing I would say is that so we do a lot of work with real estate management companies, and what they've been telling us is throughout the pandemic, they have shifted their model to be about supporting both leasehold services, but also supporting architectural services. And they found that the architectural service for their tenants has been used at 100% capacity. What does that mean? Everybody with a lease is redesigning their workspace. Why are they doing that? Because they're getting away from the close the door, have a seat model of interaction to purposeful interaction. So we're seeing a lot of organizations moving away from everybody has a desk kind of model to a percentage of people have desks, and the majority of our space or a non-insignificant percentage of our space is used for collaboration space. So if that means more nuanced conference rooms, if that means different ways of collaborating, but that's been the shift that we've seen in the real estate side of things, and it enables a lot of the things Duane was talking about. But it enables them. It doesn't mean that they're going to happen on, by default. So, it's real estate is done very consciously as a choice. It's a material choice. It's a financial choice, but it's also not, a silver bullet to a lot of these things. So, the more thoughtful organizations are about how they use their space, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like there's just every day there's just a tremendously large list of articles and cranes or whatever the publication is about about the focus on office space. What is it going to look like, and what what are tenants doing? It's really is going to be a tremendous focus going forward. So that's a great point, Michael. Thank you. Okay, let me just shift gears to another question, which I think is a very good one. And we've touched a little bit on this in some of our earlier discussions, but I think it's good to round back to this point. The question is, how are companies ensuring employees actually take time off to rest and recover? With the constant access, client communications are overwhelming during this time, and many employees take time off, PTO, but are working behind the scenes. How do you, what strategies or thoughts do you have about how to make sure employees are really getting that rest time, particularly in light of the discussion we had earlier about mental health?
I mean, I guess I can kick us off on that one. I would say that having the ongoing dialogue is very important just to assess an employee's general state of mind. So PTO and their desire to take some time off and their desire to, of course, avoid burnout is very important. And I think by having those ongoing conversations, you can track where they are and note when you possibly need to give them a bit of a push. I'm going to say something that's might be a little bit controversial, and that's that we can't fully solve this problem, I don't think. I think that part of the new world of work is this complete blurring of personal and professional lives. And the fact that you may take PTO, but you may be answering emails during it. And the trade-off for that is that you have a lot more flexibility in terms of how your job gets done, when and where. So I think that we absolutely can be encouraging of employees to make sure that they're taking care of themselves holistically, but at the same time recognizing that for a lot of people, there aren't going to be those clear delineations anymore between time off and time on.
Yeah, I'd actually like to echo what Duane said earlier, because I think that's a big piece of making this work, is that our leaders need to role model, right? We can have the conversations all we want, but if leaders are sending out emails at 12 o'clock on a Sunday night, employees are going to feel obligated to respond. And so what we've done is made constant communication from our leadership to our employee base about really doing this, taking that time off, finding that time off, checking in to make sure that, whatever PTO allowance you have for the year, that it's actually being used and not carried over and things like that. We also instituted a sort of a ways of working model, which really helps leaders to work with their employees to say, okay, let's keep meetings maybe to 55 minutes instead of an hour. So you have 5 minutes to run to the bathroom, grab a glass of water, as opposed to back-to-back meetings, making sure that you're really inviting only the necessary people to the meeting. So people's calendars don't, that it's okay to not turn your video on. Like, I do it with my team all the time. I work out in the morning. Sometimes the first meeting, you don't want to see me on video. So it's okay. You guys can turn the video off. We don't need to constantly see each other, because we wouldn't do it in the office. You would pick up a phone call and, either go see somebody, but you wouldn't always be on video. So it's really about making sure that leaders are enforcing that. And again, goes back to this authenticity and transparency, that as long as leaders are doing that, people will begin to feel more comfortable taking that time off, feeling sort of more human and not feeling like they have to do everything.
I agree 1000% with that response.
Well said.
Vulnerability is so important, like showing that you're a human being and that you have the same needs as they do. You have the need to take time off. You have the need to stress out when things aren't going your way or when something comes down the pike that you weren't anticipating, and just being able to be transparent about those things. I think leaders, we were talking about earlier about how leaders feel like they have to have all the answers. Well, you don't also have to appear like you've got it all together all the time. I think it really does help with that human connection when you see your leader as a person.
We actually had one leader early on in the pandemic start the meetings and actually have everybody on the meeting introduce their kid or their pet. She would bring her kids in and, this is my daughter, so-and-so, and like everybody would go around, and that really helps people to understand that it's just okay. The dog's barking, we'll get through it. The mailman is out there, kids are running in and out. It's like, we'll get through it.
No, that's great, because again, I'm sure many people and many of us, and I've had it myself, is that stressful, intense, tightening feeling of, okay, what's going to happen? Who's going to be screaming or running through the room when this call starts? And so I think recognizing that, having a leader recognize that and really, try to alleviate that stress it seems like such a small thing, but it actually makes a tremendous difference. It really does. So that's a great point. And actually, I've got so just to turn to one more question, which actually kind of dovetails nicely on the point that we just made, but kind of in the other direction, which is really more about senior business leaders. And I know we started our conversation talking about leadership, and I think this question is an interesting one. So the question is, how do we create more psychological safety for senior business leaders to be more human and vulnerable? It seems like a key is more human connection to talk through navigating this new path, more one-to-one support. So any thoughts from the panel on that question, just in terms of how we make senior leaders who may not be comfortable sort of in this space feel more confident about their ability to do so?
I'm happy to give it a
Mike.
try. How about that? Duane's going to correct me on this. About that. So okay, the psychological safety, I think, as with a lot of these questions, which have been phenomenal, part of the answer is like hidden in the question. So the construct of psychological safety for a business leader, like let's put a senior business leader on notice right now, and let's look at sort of how they got there and why they are what they are and their abilities. They've been managing, and we've been managing in an environment that heretofore has been somewhat stable. And the last 12 months have done two things. COVID-19 has changed the way we work, but we've also, and we've sort of haven't really talked about this today, had a massive social unrest movement throughout the country. And we've had an entire shift in terms of how a lot of organizations view themselves in terms of social actors as a result of that unrest. So a lot of organizations have found themselves blurring the line between, look, man, we don't talk about that at work, to we are talking about that at work because, and Duane made a very good point, like when you want to bring your whole self to work, you're bringing your whole self to work. You're not, you're not sketching around the edges and sort of force fitting a model. And the psychological safety for an employee to do that is in many respects only as good as her manager modeling that and her manager's manager modeling that. So what we've seen organizations do, like let's take a crawl, walk, run model. I have a client who's a CHRO of an oil and gas organization, and she spent a lot of time with her executives going, you know what I want you to write a letter to the employee base. I want you to say, like, this has been a very difficult time for me personally. And I want you to share some of the personal challenges you've had. And I want you to tell stories. And I want you to like think about some of the leadership coaching stuff a lot of us on the phone have been through, where we've learned how to tell stories and we've learned how to engage with people that way. And I want you to do that en masse, right? And that's like crawling and walking. And then at that point, they're feeling, wow, I'm a little bit more comfortable. I'm kind of bearing my soul a little bit to the organization. No one's judging me. It's okay. It's a safe space for me too. And in doing so, you're normalizing bringing your whole self to work, but you're also allowing for us to now, well, let's engage on some of the thornier, way more, some might say political or social, but certainly non-business traditional challenges that we've been facing. And I can engage on that as well. And I've created that feedback loop with my employees that we were talking about earlier. I'm getting that constant input and I'm helping drive the firm's position or the organization's position that way as well. And that's what running looks like in this kind of model. So, I mean, I don't know if any of those are helpful, but there's certainly some things that we've seen to help kind of bring people and stabilize them a little bit.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point, Michael, and very, very well said. I mean, just, particularly with respect to, all of the other, the pandemic, but plus also the other social change and other issues that we've seen this year, which really, has also made the importance of those communications even greater. So, well, I have to say, I mean, we're right up at an hour here, and I think we could probably go on for another several hours. Just really been just a great discussion from the panel, great insights from all of you, and also some really fantastic questions from our audience. And I apologize, I know there were a few more that we don't have the time to get to, but wanted to just mention again how important and timely this topic was in the discussion. And certainly, what struck me about it was really just the focus on setting the right tone as a leader, transparency and authenticity, and walking the walk in terms of what you expect from your team. Really just great, I think, observations and thoughts. And so again, to our audience, we hope you found this information helpful and to carry you through the rest of your week. And we've just asked that you keep an eye on the Executive Club's website for more upcoming virtual programs. In particular, we hope that you can join us on March 11th for the Food and Beverage Forum's Restaurant Recovery Panel. And you can sign up online at www.executiveclub.org if you choose to do so. So once again, thank you so much to our panel. A virtual round of applause for all of you. Really a fantastic job. Thank you for making the time, and we hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you
so much
all.
for having us.
Everybody.